Hi, Neil Lazarus here. A lot happening here in the Middle East, especially since my last podcast. And many of you reached out asking for an explanation, really, of what's going on. So let's try and explain a little bit what's happening in Jerusalem in particular and the violence that has broken out. And as you probably saw on the television screens, really quite large amounts of people. We had something like 75,000 people last night on the Temple Mount. Why are these protests happening? Why are the clashes taking place? Why are they so violent? And could it perhaps spread to a third intifada? Because there's nothing like the future of Jerusalem to spark anger. First of all, I think we need to look at the calendar and where we are. Look, it's Ramadan, or the end of Ramadan, and the end of Ramadan is always a time where you have thousands of people in Jerusalem. You also have emotions being high. So Jerusalem is a tense place, especially East Jerusalem is a tense place during Ramadan anyway. But a number of things came together all at the same time, more or less on the same week, to create an explosive situation. Number one, we saw the elections of the Palestinian Authority being cancelled. Now that I think is important. Abu Mazen cancels the elections. That's problematic for Hamas. Hamas was hoping to get rid of Abu Mazen in the West Bank. The reason why the elections were not held, was that Abu Mazen actually feared that if they did hold them, he would lose power. So they were cancelled. Believe me, and their whole excuse of East Jerusalem and the Israeli Arabs not voting in East Jerusalem was a pretext. The reality is, I think Abu Mazen certainly didn't want the elections, and Israel was concerned what the results could be. There's definitely that idea of better the devil you know than the devil you don't. Elections are cancelled, number one. As a result, Hamas has got a problem. It needs to spread its influence in the West Bank. It needs to spread its influence further than the Gaza Strip. If it can't do it democratically, then it will do it on the streets. Now, part of the reason why the last few days have been so violent is what you have seen is actually a standoff between Hamas and Fatah on who can bid each other for being most loyal to Al-Quds, Jerusalem. It's nothing new, by the way. During the second intifada, with the period of bus bombings, we saw rivalry between the two groups who could carry out the largest number of terrorist attacks. So that doesn't surprise me at all. So number one, if you like, Ramadan. Number two, the elections, and therefore Hamas seeking to incite what's happening on the ground, spreading it from Gaza throughout the West Bank. And by the way, it's worth noting that we've seen the increase of what we call terror balloons, these balloons coming over from Gaza into Israel. We've seen in the last 48 hours increase in the number of those coming across. Rockets have been there. I was surprised last night there weren't rockets. Again, this could already be out of date by the time I hit the publish button. So at the moment, there hasn't been massive rocket attack in relation to what's happening in Jerusalem. Okay, so Ramadan, elections. 3. The events at Damascus Gate. One of the things which I would argue is that if you wanted an example of bad policing, other than the events in Meron, too soon? Perhaps, but that's maybe another podcast. If you have a look at what the police decided at Damascus Gate, it was a wrong decision. They decided for some reason or other that they wouldn't allow Palestinians to sit on the stairs of Damascus Gate, and they would put up some form of those like metal, what they call blockade type things, That was a wrong decision, and it doesn't take much to ignite an explosion here in the Middle East, and especially in Jerusalem, especially in Ramadan, especially with the cancellation of elections. So that led to riots in East Jerusalem around Damascus Gate, and that in itself created an undercurrent of tension. Now, you also have something which has been going on now for 10 years, but is also coming ahead, which is the whole story of Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah is an area in Jerusalem where Palestinian residents may be evicted depending on what the Supreme Court of Israel says. Now, it's going to get a little bit complicated. So basically, what has happened is as follows. On February the 10th, 2021, the Jerusalem District Court upheld an October the 20th, 2020 Jerusalem Magistrate Court decision requiring a number of Sheikh Jarrah residents to vacate properties they are living in by May the 2nd, 2021. Now, hold on. What's Sheikh Jarrah? Where is it? Etc. Don't know how well you know Jerusalem. If you know it, let me explain where it is. It is right near the kever, the grave of Shimon HaTzedek. If you know the East Jerusalem at all, you may have, if you were on a birthright group, may have stayed in one of those hotels on the east side of Jerusalem. It's literally a 5-minute walk from there. It's just down the road. So yeah, that's more or less where it is. What's happened is as follows. The whole area is complicated, and it's an argument about who has control over the property. According to the Supreme Court, the land in question, of which these houses are built on and of which the residents are meant to be evicted, was owned by the chief rabbi, Hacham Bashi, Avraham Ashkenazi, and chief rabbi Meir Orbach, until the War of Independence in 1948. So up until the creation of the State of Israel, though the area was controlled by those people, Jews, if you hadn't got it. They purchased it, they bought it in 1875 from its Arab owners. So that's important. In other words, this concept of that area having a legal claim to it by Jews is going to provide the basis of the conflict, because that's up until the War of Independence. Now, what happens next is that the residents, the area falls under Jordanian control. Remember the War of Independence. Jerusalem is reunited in 1967. As a result, some of the refugees of the War of Independence, Palestinian refugees, moved into that area of Sheikh Jarrah. Now, the Jewish claim gets more complicated. And again, I want to give you the legality behind it. What happened were two Jewish organizations, one called Vadat Eidat Hasfadim and Vadat Klali Leknesset Yisrael, worked to register the land with British mandatory government prior to 1948. So they tried to register it in 1946. The properties were registered with Israeli authorities under these two organizations in 1973. So these two organizations say this land was controlled by Jews, register it. It's recognized as registered by the Supreme Court. Now, the organization sold the properties to the Nachlaot Shimon organization in 2003. So bottom line, the Jewish nationalists are saying, hey, this belongs to us. Okay, so now let's make it even more complicated. We need to go back again. 1979, okay, there's a High Court decision which said that the residents, who were now Palestinian, living in the houses, should, i.e. the tenant, should pay rent. Okay, they're renting accommodation. They need to pay rent for the property. And they are residents living on the land owned by these two organizations which registered it. Following me? You can always play it again. It's complicated. They said they were required to pay the rent to the organizations that own the properties. Now, the problem is the residents failed to pay any rent. They said, hey, we've lived here. We're continuing to live here. This doesn't belong to the Jews. Now, let's make it more complicated, which was that in the area there's also illegal building going on without permission of the Israeli government post-67. As well as that, the Palestinian ownership was also lending out or renting out the property which, according to the quarterlies, they didn't own. I did warn you it was complicated. It's an argument about who was there, who is the landowners, who are the tenants, and who should be paying rent, but in the heart of Jerusalem. Bottom line, crucially, in 1982, a number of the residents, including those who were descendants, appealed to the district court, agreed in magistrate court that the two Israeli non-profit organizations were the legal landholders. So the court rules against the Palestinians. Now that's going to be the basis of what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. Now those people, what about the people living there? 3 of the people who appealed the court's decision are the children and grandchildren of residents who their ownership was acknowledged by, acknowledged the ownership by Jewish organizations, Israeli organizations. They were meant to be staying. You also have people who said that, hey, hold on, no, we don't recognize Jewish ownership because we bought it. We paid for it. We don't know about what the Jews claim. We paid for it. Unfortunately, they didn't provide the right documents or proof that it was sold to anybody, and the person who was selling it had the right to sell to them. So you have a very real situation going on, which is effectively that the court is going to be siding with Jewish nationalists. Now, if you add to that the settler movement in Jerusalem, which is quite a nationalist group, which has this idea of, look, we're going back, we're going to make Jerusalem the united capital. You have fireworks. Jerusalem is enough to ignite, and has ignited the streets of Gaza, has ignited the streets of Jordan. Now, I know it's a little bit complicated. Recommend you listen to this one more time. But that's, if you like, the basic legal background to the Sheikh Jarrah story. So, why the explosion? The scenes of people being evicted, again, rightly or wrongly. And by the way, I would argue that legally they may have the right to evict these tenants. Whether it's just to do so, I have a lot of questions about it. I'm not sure, seriously. Legally, probably. Okay, so you have Sheikh Jarrah, you have the Damascus Gate policing fiasco, you have the elections being cancelled and Hamas needing a new cause. Combine that with the end of Ramadan, and tomorrow, we're recording this on Sunday, Monday you have a march which is meant to go through on Jerusalem Day, which is meant to go through, a Jewish march which is meant to be going through Damascus Gate. It happens every year. The question is whether the police will allow it. So tomorrow could even be more explosive. Other than that, not a lot happening. Like I said, feel free to reach out. If I wasn't clear, drop me a line. You can contact me via my website, Awesome Seminars. Major reasons for the explosions in Jerusalem, political explosions and violence in Jerusalem.
You're listening to Middle East expert and keynote speaker Neil Lazarus, live from Jerusalem. If you like this, why not invite Neil Lazarus to speak at your synagogue, church or school? Check out his website, awesomeseminars.com. Neil Lazarus, educating, motivating, challenging.